Howdy everybody, and welcome to the first section in a multi-part series on recreating some of my favorite games on the NES. I have a lot of things to say, so let's get cracking. First off, this isn't a full tutorial on how to recreate every part of the game, and nor will any of the future tutorials that I do. While this tutorial is meant for beginners and intermediates, I do use some scripts that I won't be trying to explain the function of. Some code that is a bit more complex than I want to cover at this time. Most important, namely of this, would be the palette swap system, which I'm actually going to introduce right off the bat because it's going to be part of the very first thing that we set up. Also, I don't really break up this tutorial into specific mechanics sections like a lot of other tutorials do, but rather into concepts of the things that I want to do. As you can see in this diagram here, I have laid out the course as I'm going to do it. We have the title screen, character select screen, item selection screen, overworld screen, shop screens, dungeon screen, and game over screen. Then we have the concepts inside of each one that I'm going to go through as we go over each one of these, such as the input, sound, palette swapping, etc. Speaking of which, this tutorial won't be a one-to-one recreation of the original game either. The original game had many bugs, some of which I fixed, and this one will have many bugs too that I have introduced. Like the bug that is crawling around on my screen right now that you can't see. I wish we'd stop doing that. Anyways, so additionally, some of the technology that was used in the original game was kind of outdated, such as the password system. You would click on the character and it would pop up a long string of text that you have to re-enter if you want to save. And nobody really likes that, and besides, nobody uses it anymore. So I've updated the save system to be more modern and some other things too. So, I mean, come on, if The Legend of Zelda could do a save system, I could in this game too. Anyways, we'll be starting the tutorial at the beginning, title screen, and working on the concepts associated with it. Most importantly, right now, we're going to be doing the palette swapping today. And I've left a number of pre-uploaded sprites and material in this in the project file that is available in the information section of this video. So in it, you'll have sprites that are preloaded, such as our background sprites. That I'll go over how to upload them yourself if you were to be doing your own stuff like this in the future. There's also different scripts that are still in there, utilities, that I'll explain how they work, but I won't go in over the specifics of how the specific mechanics of how they work, either because they're a bit more complex, or you can find out how they work in other places. And then we got the rooms over here, which are the stages, the places that you see inside the game. I've left these things here because tiling the rooms is a bit of a pain, and I want you all to enjoy the work that I did tiling the room already for you, so you don't have to do that. Alright then, so let's get started here. So I just want to say that I'm not the number one best programmer in the world, and so don't take everything I say and do as gospel, but take it as a good way to get started on your own. So what I did right here is right click, create object. Creating objects is how we get things to work inside of our rooms. So in this case we have object 0. Press F2 after highlighting that, and I can rename it whatever I want. In this case I'm going to name it object title. Now object title, you can see this is a naming convention. I like to put obj underscore and then title in front of a lot of my objects. Then there are other objects that I use other specific naming schemes for to help keep things organized. So, and this is my preferences. People use different ways of doing it all, of naming things all the time. So let's see here. With the object title comes the sprite title background. So in this case, we have the Legacy of the Wizard background here. This is what you would see on the front screen when you start the game. To get a sprite into the game brand new, you would, again, right-click and create a sprite. And then name it however you like. This goes with me. I put SPR underscore in the front of there. Then you would go to import. Let's see, we have pictures, GameMaker resources, Legacy of the Wizard, images. In this case, title underscore background.png. I save my images as PNG or GIF. GIF would be for simpler images, especially if I have a lot of different frames for it. But GIFs are kind of limited in the amount of colors that you can have, and so I prefer to work with PNGs if possible. It'll pop this little message saying that, oh, if you import this, you'll overwrite whatever was already there. And it'll even do that if it's a brand new image. So just, you could probably just hit don't show this message again. In fact, I should probably do that. And it will load in and be exactly like that. And we don't really need to do anything with this image right now. It's good just as it is. So we go down to here where it says no sprite. Go to background, sprite title. And if we go over here to our rooms, we have our title room. We're going to want to move this up here. Click and drag to start. You can see we have a blank room. Not very much going on here. The only thing that I've done in this room is change the size of the room. So I've made the width 256 and the height 224. And let's see, I should say a lot of these things in this game are, I haven't really done the best job making sure everything is one-to-one as far as the sprites and tiles and whatnot go in these rooms, because my first time running through all this stuff and trying to figure out whether it's 240 height or if it's 224 height or if it's 256 height, and so I had a lot of stuff that was in the wrong, that was built wrong. So in the future tutorials, these will hopefully be fixed, but there will be some small issues caused by this in this issue, in this tutorial. I fixed it in code, but it's still there, and it's really annoying to me. So anyways, we set the room's width to 256, height to 224. And I guess just say, if you want a room, create room. In this case, I title it with RM underscore. So if you want to do that as well. 256, 224. And what we can do now is click and drag this object into the room. You'll need to make sure you have clicked on the instances layer right here when you drag and drop, because if you click on like background layer, it'll give you a little X, because the only thing you can drag into a background layer is a background item, and we don't really, aren't really any background items. You control the background through here. In fact, with this object title, I could get rid of the whole image here, and I could just make it a background if I felt like it. But just to make it easier to visualize, I have made it as part of the object and in part of the placing. You'll note that the room has this grid visible here. You can change the size of the grid right here, and that will allow you to snap things smaller and smaller until you're doing just one-to-one snapping, and at which point there pretty much isn't a grid. And in fact, if you click on an object and then you hold Alt, you can move it, or let's see, Control actually. You can move it around wherever you want without snapping. So that can be useful when placing some things in some games. But in this game, everything should be snapping to the grid pretty much, so we'll just let that snap there. We can close the room title for now because we're probably never going to look at it again. and leave it right there for now, but we're going to need to move the room init back to the top when we add in the initialization objects, which we'll do a bit later. So what we need to do next is add an event to this object here. Events are where all the code in the game run. So we have this create event. Create event is the very first thing that happens when the game starts, when this object is created. So back to actually, here we go, back to this room. So we can see here we have objects, and if we have multiple objects in a room, they'll be named automatically, and you can actually change that by clicking here and changing their name if you have specifics that can be used in other instances. In fact, we'll probably use that later. But as you can see, we have multiple objects, and they are created in order. And when an object is created, all the code that's in the creation code is executed before anything else. Before any other event happens in the game, all the creation code happens. And this can be a problem when you're working with some things later on that I'll describe. And we're also going to need a step, and we're going to need a draw. So the step is something that happens after the creation. In fact, it's what happens every single frame of the game. Every frame is a step, and every step happens every frame. Speaking of frames, we should go down here to our options, and you don't really need to do this because the game is already set up, but you'll need to set this to 60 frames per second because that's how fast NES games run. And if you don't have that at 60, things will be slow and won't really work properly. So we have that, and we also have the draw event. Draw events are where the game tells this to draw whatever you have set as your sprite onto the screen. As far as drawing goes, drawing happens after the steps again, and when the draw happens, so if you move your character around in the step, you don't actually see that movement until the draw. So you could do something like in the step, you could say, okay, we need to move to a new room. And then in the draw, you draw the new room, and it will seamlessly move from room to room without you actually seeing the character move that one last pixel into the side of the screen to tell it to change rooms. Stuff like that. But whenever we add the draw event to an object, that cancels out the self-draw ability of the object. So we have to actually tell it to draw itself again so that it will draw itself. Otherwise, it won't draw itself. Let's come back here to the create event. And what we're going to do here is set up a palette swapping system. Because while the image here has some of the information we need, there's a little bit that's missing. We're missing a of the that would go right there. So it's legacy of the wizard. And there should also be press start drawing across right there. So we're going to need to get both of those into this game. And one of the things that the original game does is it causes those two different words the two different word sets to flash different colors. In order to do that, they use palette swapping. And palette swapping is where you tell the game things with this color on the next frame need to be drawn at another color, and on the next frame need to be drawn at another color. So if it's drawn white first frame, then it's drawn yellow, then it's drawn blue, or whatever color setup they wanted to use. For us, we have here in the world, we have a palette section. And we have the title section, actually. My organization is kind of messed up here. You might notice these tabs here. you can create those tabs by adding a group, and then you just drag stuff into the tabs and whatnot to be able to organize them. So, anyways, back to here. We have our sprite palette right here. In this case, I have it set so that it says when things are white and things are this light magenta kind of puce color. I don't know what color it is. When it's this color, then on the next frame, draw it this color. Next frame, draw it this color. Next frame, draw it this color. Then go back to here, to the start. That's how the code will work for this setup here. So to get this thing working, we're going to need to start with a palette underscore index underscore equals 0. Now this is what is known as a variable. Variables can contain anything that you want. So we have a 0 in this case, or it could be a true or a false, or it could be a string, or many other different data structures that will be slightly introduced later on, but I'm not going to explore them fully in this project because they're advanced and I don't really want to go into them so much right now. Plus, I only have so much time to program this thing, so I skimped a lot on the advanced structure so that I could get all the game into here as much as I could. Anyway, so back to this 0. Now, 0 tells it to start here, 0. Then we'll later on be incrementing it, so it'll be 1, 2, 3. Then it'll loop back to 0 again. In programming, a lot of times you'll start at 0 rather than 1 because binary works like that. So next up, we're going to need a counter, and I told you that will be. So when I said it will change every frame, you could have it doing that, or you could have it changing every other frame, or every 4 frames, or every 8 frames, or however many frames you want. In this case, we're going to have the counter, which will increment every frame, and then every X amount of frames that are determined by the value of counter, it will then swap the palette to give us the nice little color swapping effect. Finally, we tell our palette system how fast we want to swap. So in this case, we want to swap every 8 frames. So let's go over to the step event, and we are going to set up the palette. And don't mind me, but I misspell palette quite often because palette is a hard word to spell. In this case, we are going to use a structure, a function known as a if. If counter underscore mod palette underscore swap underscore speed underscores equal to 0. Alright, so what we have here is an if. An if is what it sounds like. If this is true, then do something. So in this case, we have counter, 0, mod. Mod is a keyword for divide this number by this number and give me the remainder. If you don't know what a remainder is, then you need to review your remedial division. Then we have this right here, very important. We have 2 equal signs. That is an equals 2. When we say John equals 8, that means that the variable John is equal to 8. But if we say equals 2, what we're telling it is instead read this value and see if it is equal to this value. So in this case, this calculation is equal to 0. So the remainder is equal to 0, then do this. Pal underscore index underscore plus plus. Adding the plus plus here tells it to increment me by 1. So 0, now 1. And next up, pal underscore index underscore is equal to wrap. Pal underscore index underscore 0. Pal underscore swap underscore get underscore pal underscore count. Sprite underscore title palette -1. So what do we got going here? We have pal underscore index underscore equals wrap. So in this case, wrap is a script. Script is a set of code that does something according to the values that you set into here. We'll be setting up our own scripts later. For now, this one can just be used, or you can peruse it as you feel like from the code that you can see on the screen by pausing. But what this script does is it says, okay, I have a value. It has a minimum value that we want, and it has a maximum value that we want. In this case, the maximum value is another script which says, palette swap here, how many palettes do we have? So it says 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that means we have 4. But we also want to subtract 1 because when we look at our index as far as our programming goes, it starts at 0. So now what happens is, so it should be 0, 1, 2, 3. And 0, 1, 2, 3. If you can see me right now, I'd be counting on my fingers. That is 4 numbers. So that's how many that we need. So if the value goes over this, then go back to the minimum. If the value goes under this, go back to the top. So I hope that's explanatory for you there. But basically we want it so that when we reach the end of our palette, we go back to the white and light magenta color. And last but not least, counter ++. Don't forget the underscore. The underscores at the end of variables are my affectation. I like to put them there to help keep track of variables that I am using inside of an object. So that if there are some built-in variables, such as speed, that are native to GameMaker Studio. And if I want to use the word speed as a variable, I would have to add the underscore to the end to make it so that it's a unique word rather than being accidentally used as part of the GameMaker Studio's built-in variables. We'll use those built-in variables to some extent later on. They're very simple, and they don't really allow you to customize movement very well. So that's why you usually build your own movement systems and whatnot. So unless you have something very simple you want to move around. So now we got this system working. Next up, we need to draw our palette. So we go here, draw ourselves, and draw of the, and push start. You'll note I do this thing with the commenting. This is code that doesn't run, so I can just type whatever I feel like here. Anything that is preceded by these slashes allows me to put whatever I want there, and usually I put in words so that I can understand what in the world I'm doing, and I can kind of clear English read what I'm doing as I go along, in case I, for some reason, go several months without looking at a project, and I come back and it doesn't become the case of only when I wrote the code, only me and God knew what it did. Now only God knows. I don't want that to ever happen if I can help it. So I tend to comment a lot of things. Pal underscore swap underscore set. Sprite underscore title underscore palette. Pal underscore index underscore and false. Again, this is a script part of the palette swap system. Pal underscore swap underscore reset. And I'm not going to go over how it works because it's very advanced. So, but I will go over this here. Sprite underscore of underscore the 0 64 5. Image underscore X scale. Underscore Y scale. Underscore angle. Image underscore blend. Image underscore alpha. And done. So what am I doing here? We are drawing the sprites. Sprite of the and sprite push start. These are just the words as sprites. We could do it with, we could actually just use text as well, but in this case I'm going to use sprites because the actual sprites kind of use a different font than the normal in-game font, so it's a bit harder to, I don't want to have to add in multiple fonts for this game to be able to do that. Alright, so what we're doing here, drawing the sprite, subimage 0. If you have multiple images, you would have subimage 0, subimage 1, 2, 3, etc. In this case, I'm telling just 0. I don't want any other additional subframes if it happen to have any. And I'm drawing it at X position 64, Y position 65. A lot of times drawing them at these positions is not really a great idea, especially if the object moves around. But in this case, the object does not move around, nor does the screen move around in the slightest, so it doesn't really matter if I'm drawing it on the GUI or just drawing it right here. We'll talk about drawing on the GUI later. Then we have image X scale, Y scale, image angle, blend, image alpha. These are just default values. As you can see, they're built-in variables. They're green, native to the object, and for the most part, you don't really need to worry about them right now. Image X scale tells whether or not it's drawing left or right properly, up and down. This tells you if it's rotated at a 90-degree angle or 45 or whatever. And image blend would tell you how much of the color you want blended in with another color. Then image alpha determines the opacity, whether or not you want it to be half visible or fully visible. These would be used later on, so, but not right now. Anyways, that's it for palette swapping. Let's take a look at what we got going here. Press run. There you go. We have this little tiny screen here. And in our next installment, we will be making this much bigger and easier to see. So thank you very much, everybody, for sticking with me, and hope you have a great time.